Hello once again, ladies and gentlemen. If you're hearing my voice, you've found the Hulegaard Books podcast, and what a wonderful time to have done so. It's release week for the Edge of Oblivion anthology, and my guest on this episode is contributing author Courtney Cantrell. Over the last few years, Courtney has published a wide variety of work, all with a flair for the fantastical. From her paranormal fantasy trilogy, The Demons of Saltmarsh, to her epic Legend of the Lightwalker series, Courtney's imagination and refined storytelling skill takes center stage. Exactly what you would expect from an author that completed her first novel at the age of 17. Courtney titled her website Court Can Write, and yes, she certainly can. She loves to push herself and evolve as a writer, often participating in flash fiction challenges, which she makes available as free reads at www.courtcan.com. In addition to discussing her short story for the Edge of Oblivion anthology, Courtney talks about some of the barriers that stand in the way of an author completing their work. How do you split your time between writing and being a full-time mom? Can a last-minute decision to change the fate of a character grind your progress to a halt? Should friends and family worry about how easily you slip into the mind of a deranged character? Meet Courtney Cantrell and get her thoughts on those questions and more in Episode 4 of the Hulegaard Books podcast. Courtney Cantrell, welcome to the Hulegaard Books podcast. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Very glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
I am excited to have you on the show because I have been speaking to you over Twitter and email for like 2 or 3 years now. So this is an exciting opportunity to get to chat face to face, as it were.
Yes.
Well, as you know, I've been inviting a lot of the authors from the Edge of Oblivion anthology, which is coming out February 3rd, just to come on the show and talk a little bit about their contributions to the book. And when I saw that you were also donating a story to it, it was just a no-brainer to have you on here. So let's dive into that. Let's talk about it. And I love this title, The Mercy and the Schadenfreude of the Soulless. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Perfect. I figure I'll ask the person that actually spent time in Germany if I'm going to try to pronounce a German word. But yeah, I haven't had a chance to read the story yet, so I was wondering if maybe you could kind of talk us through what was your inspiration behind it? What's it all about?
The inspiration behind it is a couple of characters, Grace and Jack, who popped into my head back in 2005. I was doing a novel for National Novel Writing Month that year. And the novel itself was about a novelist doing National Novel Writing Month, except she was having trouble with the story because the characters kept popping in to correct her. One of those characters was Grace, and Grace had a guy who was deeply in love with her named Jack. And that novel kind of explored how they became a couple. And since then, every couple of years or so, I've found myself writing a Grace and Jack story, just the progress of their relationship and all the various pitfalls they encounter, mainly because Grace is a little crazy. At least she seems to be. And by crazy, I mean like certifiably crazy. She believes that she crosses dimensions and travels through time without anybody else realizing it. Kind of like quantum leaping into herself over and over, if you are familiar with Quantum Leap, the TV show.
Oh, boy.
So she's convinced that she does these things, and it's all in her quest to save the life of her first husband, because she's convinced she is responsible for his death, and she wants to make it right. Not that she wants to give up Jack, because she loves him just as deeply and is just as committed to him, but she wants to make that death of her first husband right. So all of her insanity, or her apparent insanity, seems to stem from this incredible guilt. And poor Jack, in the beginning, he's kind of along for the ride, not really realizing the depth of her problems. In the course of all these stories that I've written, he starts to realize that maybe she's not quite as crazy as she seems. And that particular aspect is what this newest story in Edge of Oblivion is about.
Oh, that's awesome. So you talked about how Grace and Jack is, a creation that you came up with a little while ago, and that, every couple of years you kind of have this idea to expand the story. So are you thinking that Grace and Jack may somehow get their own novel at some point, or do you think that they're just kind of like short story fodder that you'd love to mine every so often?
That's the question I've been asking myself for a while now. I'm really not sure. I'd kind of like for them to have their own novel. The novel that they started out as, I did actually finish it. So it is a complete story, but I don't know that it will ever be publishable because it was still fairly early on in my novel writing career, and the quality of writing is perhaps not so good.
You're speaking my language now.
So I would like to do something with that novel someday. I could definitely see collecting all of the short stories and putting them together in a novel or in a short story anthology. But there are more stories to tell. So if I ever do a collection of their stories, it's going to be a while. Because even though the Edge of Oblivion story is kind of toward the end of their saga, there's still holes to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just see.
I noticed that you've been writing a good mixture of full-length novels and short stories over the course of your publishing career. For me, writing short stories and writing novels are almost two completely different processes, even though the end result is the same. And I'm wondering if that's true for other writers as well. Like, do you find that your process differs when you're preparing to write novels versus short stories?
Oh, very definitely. When I sit down to write a novel, I plot out a lot of it first. I will usually do a bunch of character descriptions and do a list of what are my big events, what are the big turning points in the story. Sometimes, well, most of the time actually, I will even go chapter by chapter and say, okay, in this chapter this happens, in this chapter this happens. Just do a chapter summary of what I think it's going to look like before I ever write any of the novel. I will usually write a scene between the main character and one of the other characters that might not even make it into the book, but just to get a feel for the characters, find out how they talk, how they think, find out what they're supposed to sound like in my head. When I sit down to write a novel, there's a lot of work that goes into it beforehand, and I'll do that for weeks in advance.
Mm-hmm.
When I sit down to write a short story, it's by the seat of my pants. I don't really do any planning at all. I might have a vague idea of where I want the story to go or where I think it's going to go. Probably have an ending in mind that might or might not actually happen. Yeah, definitely a very different process. That might change. I don't know. I'm actually fairly new to short story writing. I've been doing a lot of it in the last few months. Well, the last few years, more than I ever have before. But I used to hate writing short stories. It felt like a waste of time to spend all of this effort getting into these characters and getting into their world and knowing how they think, and then you stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? I probably shouldn't say this. It's a little inappropriate, but I'm going to say it anyway. Writing short stories is always kind of like having a ton of foreplay and then never getting to the big finale. Like, give me more. So I'm learning to enjoy that process a little more. And I'm giving myself a little more freedom to play around with short stories. Especially recently, if you look at my blog, I've got a lot of stories that I've been writing that are part of flash fiction challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I like a good challenge. Just the word challenge makes me kind of want to say, okay, I'm in. So that's kind of been getting me going. It's been a good motivator lately, and it's been fun. I've been letting myself kind of explore different genres a little bit, explore different types of characters. Because I've always been very oriented toward the fantasy genre,
Mm-hmm.
and I think most of my stories will always have some element of the fantastical in them. But I'm letting myself branch out a little bit. So.
Well, and that's a perfect segue because before we set up this podcast session, I was looking at your website, www.courtcan.com, and I was noticing that you really have been publishing a lot of really cool free short stories. And I guess like that ties into what we were just talking about. I would love to hear more about what's kind of sparked that change. If you've just needed kind of a mental break from the process of writing novels and you just want to challenge yourself with kind of shorter chunks of story, or exactly what's been kind of fueling this change in your outlook on writing?
I think mainly it's been time because I am now the mother of a 16-month-old and my writing time is very limited. And I have tried and tried and tried to take what little time I have and focus it on novel writing, but I can't get into the novel long enough to stay there long enough to do anything really substantial. I've been working on this one work in progress for 2 years now, and still finished the darn thing. Writing short stories, kind of, I think it's entirely a mental thing. It's telling myself, okay, I've only got so much time, but I only have to do this little bit of work with it. I only have to finish a short story, and that can be anywhere. That can be 1,000 words. I can do that. So it's basically pep talking myself into writing. I'm writing short stories because I need to write something, and if I'm not going to write a novel, I need to write a short story.
I know that feeling, just that desire to get something out there, just to exercise your creative output. Well, let's talk about novels, because when I met you, I think you were wrapping up the Demons of Saltmarsh series, but I don't think you had quite finished it yet. I had picked up the first book in the series very early, after meeting you, and I had a chance to go through that and really get a feel for your writing style, which I really like. I really enjoy the way you write and the way you tell stories. For those who are unfamiliar with the Demons of Saltmarsh series, could you give us just an overview of it?
The elevator pitch is that it's the story of college students at a Christian university who are being stalked by demons. The longer version of that is it's a series about this small group of friends who one by one have to face a demon, literally a demon, not just, teenage angst, oh, what is my life? No, literally demons haunting them and stalking them, and in some cases kidnapping them. One of the friends actually came to the university. His name is Peter, and he is actually from a family of demon hunters. He came to the university trying to escape his family history. He wanted to be a normal boy. Yeah, that didn't quite work out for him. His main story is the second book, Shadows After Midnight. The first book, Colors of Deception, is about Holly. She's feeling very left out, very isolated from her friends because they seem to be keeping secrets from her. And in the meantime, somebody seems to be out to get her, playing pranks on her and following her to her parents' house. And it turns out that the source of her problems is that there's a demon after her. She has to decide what to do about that because on one hand, her instincts are telling her, run away, run very far away. But on the other hand, she's realizing that evil doesn't always look like evil. The things that she always thought were good might not actually be that. So her story in particular is very much of the idea that things aren't always black and white. Faith isn't always as clear as we'd like it to be. Belief isn't always as solid as we like to tell ourselves it is. This series explores a lot of deeper themes, but with the backdrop of running from demons and heading to the demon's alternate dimension homeworld, fighting zombie demons, monsters, that kind of thing. So.
Well, you've written 3 books in the Demons of Saltmarsh series. Is that the end? Did you wrap up the series, or are you thinking about possibly adding more to it in the future?
I did wrap up the trilogy. I always thought of it as a trilogy. The third book, Stains of Grace, focuses on one of Holly's friends, Anne. Anne's story kind of wraps up that group of friends and their particular issues and troubles. There's another character who makes an appearance in the second book. Her name is Jazz. She's always seemed like a very interesting character to me. She's only, I think she was 15 or 16 in that book, and I've always kind of wondered what would Jazz be like as an adult, fairly young adult, early 20s, earlier mid 20s probably, and what kind of story would she have to tell? What kind of demon would she have to face? So I might go back to that at some point and just call it a Demons of Saltmarsh novel, but no definite plans yet.
One of the things that I struggle with is that as you publish more and more work, in theory, the latest thing you've written is even better than the work before. One of my struggles is that first works stick in my brain. And I think about like my first couple of books that were published. And sometimes I wonder if it's worth the effort to go through and like completely overhaul it, right? Like write the the ultimate edition, whatever you want to call it. But I never ultimately do that. Do you think about the earlier works that you've written, like taking the Demons of Saltmarsh series, for example? Now that the trilogy is behind you, do you think about the things that you wish you'd done differently, or do you just kind of mentally move on and prepare yourself for the next series?
Yes. um, I kind of make myself mentally move on and prepare for the next series and delve into the next series and forget about the early stuff, because I know I could tinker forever and never be finished.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think about that, especially with the Saltmarsh books, because for one thing, I know there are errors in them. I've had some readers point them out to me. I've caught them myself just skimming through the book. I mean, yeah, some spelling and grammatical errors and stuff, some typos, but also a few things about the characters where I'm like, I should have brought that trait out more, or I should have allowed the character the freedom to go in this direction instead of that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely do have the urge when I let myself think about it. I've thought, maybe for the 10-year Saltmarsh anniversary, I could do some kind of author's preferred edition or something. So that's definitely in the back of my mind, but I also recognize that if I let myself do that, I will never write anything new.
As you and I are speaking today, I am currently in the final stretch of New World Order, which is the third book in the Noble trilogy. And what I'm finding is that I'm stalling a bit because I'm really excited, to tell like the final story and wrap up specifically like where we're at in the story. Everything's coming to a head, and there's like this big showdown that I've been teasing for 2 books. So we're finally there. But I find myself pausing in a weird way. I think mentally I'm having a hard time saying goodbye to these characters and to this universe. And I've already thought about spin-off opportunities, which I probably will explore, but I'm going to miss these characters. And I'm wondering, for you, does any of that play in when you write your stories? Like, do you miss these characters? Do you find yourself thinking about them months or years later?
Yes, definitely. They become friends. You spend so much time getting to know them and following them through their adventures and their trials and their troubles and their joys and their sorrows, and it's not easy just to close a door on that and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
I miss Peter. I don't know why. 20-year-old kid who doesn't, most of the time doesn't know what he wants to do with his life and is all goo-goo over this girl when he actually needs to go off and save the world. I miss that dumb kid.
After you did wrap up that series, you moved on to Legends of the Lightwalkers. This is something that I found so fascinating, is that I think it was at the end of the Saltmarsh trilogy, it was only 2 months later that you published the first book in the Lightwalkers series. How did that come to be? Did you kind of have this idea all along, or were you writing both books side by side?
Oh, well, I totally cheated. The 2 Legends of the White Walkers books that are out so far actually started as one novel, and I finished the first draft of it in 2008. And by the time I started writing the first Saltmarsh book, that Legends of the Lightwalkers book was already in its 4th draft.
Oh, wow.
So once I started writing Colors of Deception, the first Demons book, I put Legends of the Lightwalkers aside for a while and just kind of let it sit, and I did the Saltmarch series. At some point while I was doing the Saltmarch series, I did come back to Legends of the Lightwalkers, and I finished editing that book so that when the last Demons book came out, then I was almost ready to publish Legends of the Lightwalkers. It was almost done already. So I didn't really write the two series at the same time. I did some editing at the same time. So yeah, I cheated.
Well, I know how that goes because, one of the things that I think is kind of fun is when you've written a first draft or prepared for your final draft, I should say, and you've kind of shipped it off to the editor, and that process takes a lot of time. You think about how easy it is to just read a book, but when you're reading a book for the sole purpose of fixing it, making it look like we can all write really well, you need something to do with that downtime. So I find that that's when I start working on my next book or short story or whatever the case may be is while my baby is in editing, I'm working on something different.
Yes, that's that's how I do it too. When I'm done with the final draft and it's off to the editor, I can't just sit and do nothing. I have to do something.
I get too nervous thinking about the red ink that is inevitably coming back.
Yes. Yes, indeed. The pages bleed.
Yes, they do. And if you've seen any of my pre-edited work, then yeah, you'd realize how sad but true that really is. So speaking of the Legends of Lightwalkers series, I noticed in particular the cover art style was a big bold change from Saltmarch, and that makes sense. They're completely different series, but I really like this new direction. It's very eye-catching, and it kind of plays into the fantasy, of the story. But you've written 2 books in this series so far. Can you kind of catch us up to date on what's happening in this series?
The Legends of the Lightwalker series actually started back when I was in high school. I was 15, and I had a bizarre dream about a telephone booth and fog and eyes, like cat's eyes, all in the fog.
Wow.
That dream turned into a scene in a book that I wrote between the ages of 15 and 17. You can imagine how great the writing is. And I didn't quite finish it. I didn't finish it until I was in college, really. That book is kind of a prequel to the 2 books that are out, Rathana's Surrender and Rathana's Trial.
Mm-hmm.
That will probably be the next book that I tackle for this series. A couple of years ago, I went through the printout of the manuscript. That was about 250,000 words.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a doorstop.
I don't know that I write that many words in a year.
It took me several years to do it. There were a lot of adverbs in there. So a couple years ago, I sat down with that printout, which is like 6 inches thick. Okay, maybe 4, maybe not 6, 4, easily 4. And I just went through, and I wasn't even really reading as much as I was skimming. And I can't remember if I used a red pen or if I was kind to myself and used a green pen. I just went through and marked stuff. I remember writing in margins, no. Do this. Why? What are you thinking? Then I would circle a paragraph and say, yes, that's something I can use.
Mm-hmm.
Lines of dialogue underlined for yes, crossed out for no. I just basically went through and butchered the entire thing to see what it is I can use. I do plan to go back and take those bits and pieces and stitch them back together and see what I can make of that book. It is quite possible that there's nothing to be done, that it is a total loss. I really hope not, because I really love the main character. He's tortured and artistic and angry. Oh, he's very, very angry. He's supposed to be the hero. That is a challenge. I want to see how I can turn this guy into a hero when he's so ridiculously messed up and dark. He would make a better antagonist than he would a hero.
I think this plays into your whole love of challenges that we discussed earlier.
Yes, so once I get the work in progress that I'm on now, which is a sci-fi novel called Elevator People, once I get that one done, I'm going to give myself a little break, and then I'm going to turn to that poor, butchered, dark manuscript and see what I...
I think like we all kind of have that Frankenstein draft of some kind that's like been hanging on for years. I don't know that mine is 4 inches thick and could stop a mugging, but I can relate to what you're saying in principle.
Yeah, I think most writers probably can.
We talked earlier about how you have a 16-month-old baby now, or I guess not a baby at 16 months, but a
I
new.
know, she's a toddler. I couldn't believe it.
Obviously, your time is diminished. You made reference to that earlier, but I'm wondering, like, if having a child also changes other aspects of your writing. Like, if you think about maybe certain topics that you no longer want to explore, or maybe certain vocabulary. Like, I write a lot of swearing. Like, I wonder does any of that change now that you have a child? Like, do you think about how that might someday be discovered when she's old enough to read?
Yes, I do think about it. I don't think I've let it change how I write yet, but there will definitely have to be a conversation that includes, no, you can't read mommy's books until you're older. I don't use a whole lot of swearing in my books. I do in the Legends of the Lightwalker series, but it's mostly curses that are connected to that world.
Mm-hmm.
So if a character says blood and blazing sands, that's not going to offend anybody in our world.
Right.
But in the Legends of the Lightwalkers world, it's pretty offensive to a lot of people. Yeah, she could probably no. There's a sex scene. I don't think I'd want her to read that until she's old. Yeah, it's complicated.
Sure.
In my Elevator People novel, there is a character who, well, the main antagonist is a pedophile. Much to my shock, I didn't know where that came from. I started writing him before I got pregnant. I don't know if I would write him the same way now, because that hits close to home. On the other hand, maybe because it hits close to home, that should be exactly the reason I should write a character like that.
Mm-hmm.
I now know what it's like to worry about that concerning my own child. Before it was all theory.
Yeah.
Now it's a potential reality that I'm responsible for protecting her from. When I started getting into scenes where he was played a major role, and I had to get into his head, it was not a place I wanted to be. It was very uncomfortable. It
Mm-hmm.
was very disturbing. It was disturbing to me that I could even think up those thoughts that he was expressing. I'm not afraid to go where the darkness leads, but now that I have a kid, I might be more cautious in going there. I don't know.
It's an interesting point because I think that readers sometimes will read a book and kind of take either a offense or maybe just find things about a particular character or storyline that they don't like, and they automatically attribute it to being the authentic thoughts of the author. And I think like that's one of the things that is really difficult when you want to tell a story or maybe just have a character that's kind of boundary pushing and maybe making you a little uncomfortable in the process.
Yeah.
Because authenticity to me as an author is extremely important, and I think that's one of the reasons why I don't have that line in the sand about swearing, which I know is one of the topics going around these days about self-publishers.
Yeah.
And that's that. I understand that there's a sensitivity to it, but I can't imagine a world that doesn't have these things, that doesn't have these elements. There are bad people in this world. There are people that swear extensively,
They're
and
not necessarily bad people either.
yeah, no, indeed. And I think that going into the minds of these characters is fascinating, but sometimes you can find things that really make you uncomfortable. And when that happens to me, I kind of feel like that has to go in the book. Like that, those are the moments that if they're making me uncomfortable to be in the mind of this character, then it absolutely has to go in. It's a conversation I had with a friend of mine recently about sex scenes where it's a similar type of thing where she writes not true romance novels, but her novels do have an element of romance to them. And she had a concern that her friends or whatnot are going to read this story and think, oh, well, now that I've read your sex scene, like I know way more about your personal life than I want to. And when you're writing a story, whether it's, sex scenes or giving, characters a trait like being a pedophile, is it difficult for you to get into that mindset and separating Courtney from that? Or do you find it easy to kind of get into that situation and really just tell a story from a different perspective?
There are certain characters, like the pedophile character. One of the things that disturbed me so much about writing him was how easy it was.
Mm.
I don't know where in my psyche that came from. I read a lot. I watch the news.
Yeah.
I'm aware of what goes on in the world. So apparently my brain took all of that and was like, okay, we're going to mush that together, and here's a pedophile. When I was in college, I took a psychology class that was like principles of counseling or something.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the exercises that our professor had us do was he gave us case studies, and we were supposed to study the case study, and then we would play that client while he played the therapist. And we would have that therapy session in his office with a video feed going to a TV in the classroom for the rest of the class to watch. The case study that I played was a girl who is a college student, and she was bipolar with delusional tendencies. She was convinced that there was a plot to overthrow the government, and she was responsible for stopping the bad guys. This was her manic phase. And so in this role-playing therapy session, I played this girl. And when we left the office, my professor looked at me and he said, "It's a little bit scary how well you did that." It's like, I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or not.
You're you're really messed up. That was awesome.
Stop. So apparently there's part of me that slips easily into these peculiar, sometimes evil personas for characters. And that's a little scary. I can see where it would disturb friends and family greatly
Mm-hmm.
if they realize the extent of it. As far as characters that I have a really, really difficult time getting into, the latest short story that I've published on my blog, it's called George and the Babylonian Field Trip. George is the ghost of a cop. I had a little bit of a tough time with him because I don't have any experience being a cop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a whole lot to draw on. That's not really my genre. I had to several times really stop and think hard. What would a cop say in this situation? What would a cop do? How would a cop think? And I actually thought about emailing Bernard Schaefer and asking his advice.
I do that constantly.
But I needed to get the story out right then, and I didn't have time for emailing back and forth.
I'm so glad that he responds to my emails because I'm like, hey, Bernard, just random scenario for a police officer. No, and he's so awesome about getting back quickly about it.
Most of what I write has some kind of fantastical or otherworldly element. Where I have trouble, I guess, is writing stuff that's supposed to be real world.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very long explanation.
That's awesome. No, it's cool because these are really interesting topics that come up that I don't know that as a reader I really thought about these things. And when I started publishing my own books about 4 years ago, a lot of things really clicked. Like things that just, I guess, once you know the mechanics of writing a story, you see it when other people write. But
yes.
But if you don't have experience as a writer, or you've never really explored it, I can see where you might get concerned. Wondering like, how does this come from somebody's brain? What is wrong?
Yeah. I remember when I wrote the first Demons of Saltmarsh book, and I gave the second draft to my mom. There are scenes in that book where it's mostly the demon talking. Mm-hmm. When my mom gave me that book back, she's always one of my first beta readers because she's really good at editing and she loves stories. But when she gave me that book back, she said, I don't understand how your mind works. It's okay, Mama. Just read the book. It's all right.
I know exactly what you mean. Now that it's 2014, and we've talked a lot about the work that you've done up to this point, and you've talked or mentioned several times now a work in progress called Elevator People,
Uh-huh.
which is I'm like fascinated to know more about this because I've seen you tweet about this, over the course of the past. Gosh, you've been working on this now for a little over a year, right? Or
2
long?
years.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to check in with you and see kind of where we're at. And then I have some follow-up questions for you because I'm actually in a very similar position as you are, where I'm coming up on 2 years since the start of my last novel. And so I wanted to compare notes with you about kind of what that's like and the challenges and frustrations of writing a first draft.
I'm good. I'm glad it's not just me.
So let's start with an update. Like, what's happening with the development of Elevator People, and when might we get a chance to see it?
What's happening is I am finally in what I think is the next to the last chapter of the first draft. I know where it needs to go, but I'm just not completely sure how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think by the end of the book I would have that figured out. No, not quite.
I'm still changing stuff like as I go.
Yeah, I keep finding myself going back to previous chapters and tweaking and whatnot. And I think it's because I think you used the word procrastinating earlier for something you're doing.
Yep.
I think I'm procrastinating. Part of it is that there's a character who's mortally wounded, and I really don't want him to die. I think he kind of has to, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of letting him drag on in pain. I really don't want him to die. So I could either have him get magically healed. Well, it wouldn't be magical. It would be some kind of high-tech medical something because this is a science fiction novel.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could do something like have him transform into some higher being that goes off into another dimension or something. I don't really want to do that either because that feels like a cop-out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's probably going to have to die, which is
Oh.
going to devastate everybody else in the story. So I don't. That's part of the problem. If they're devastated right at the end of the story, how do I make this a good ending? It was always supposed to be a happy ending, and now suddenly maybe it's not going to be, and I don't know.
Sometimes when I'm writing my books, I feel like Joss Whedon is omnipresent and he's just kind of like leaning over my keyboard being like, kill that character. And so, yeah, like I I struggle with that as well.
Well, I'm really glad it's not just me.
Not at all. Well, it's funny because I was thinking about first draft processes, and I don't normally take this long to write a book, but it's been a combination of my day-to-day life has had some challenges and time constraints over the past couple of years as well. But again, like just really dragging out the end of the story because I feel like I'm just having a hard time letting go. But
Mm-hmm.
I did something different with this book that I hadn't tried before. That's actually really helped shape the final product, and that's that I've had two beta readers who are friends of mine and also authors that are kind of reading it as we go. So I will, I'll write like a chapter or two, and then I'll post them on like Google Docs and collect their feedback. And it's really helped me catch like early editing mistakes and all that kind of stuff. But what happened and wound up being even more valuable than I'd anticipated was getting this direct feedback from people that I guess had been hooked on the story, and then have them give me a legitimate reaction to something that happens in the plot. And one of the things that I had not counted on, which you made me think of talking about your wounded character that you hate to see die,
Mm-hmm.
is that I had a character that I felt like to help wrap up the story, they had to go. Like it just made sense to me that this character had to die in maybe in grand fashion for the story to kind of get wrapped up. But as the feedback started coming in from these friends of mine in the beta process, they became so attached to this character and telling me, like they had no idea where the story was going, but they would say like, oh, I'm so excited about this character and I love this story and I can't wait to see like what happens and I feel like another book coming. And I'm like, oh crap. like there is no book coming. So what do I do? But like taking that feedback, kind of live on the spot before an editor has even seen a draft, it helped me shape that character's progression. And now that character is going to get a different ending and they are going to survive. So I really like that process of getting feedback earlier on in the process while I still have time to make changes. But much to your point, it's taking me 2 years to write this damn book. So fingers crossed. Sometime in the next 90 days, I fully expect to submit a first draft to an editor.
Well, that's awesome. Maybe you and I can kind of keep each other accountable there. 80 days, you got to finish.
I'm going to start emailing you like every time I finish a chapter, and I'm going to be like, Courtney, where is Elevator People now? I'll taunt you. Like...
I've written one more sentence.
I'll start sending like threatening messages where I'm like, I'm gonna start tearing a page out of Salt March every time you don't finish a chapter. Well, I certainly wish you the best of luck on getting Elevator People finished because as I've been following you over the past couple of years, the story just sounds so fascinating, and I love anything in a sci-fi world. So best of luck on it. Keep going, and I really hope that we can have a New World Order / Elevator People release party at some point in the near future.
That would be awesome. Yes. Good luck to you and yours too.
Oh, thank you so much.
I know how hard that is.
Fingers crossed. Like I have so many more things I want to write, but I've got to finish this one first.
Yeah.
Well, Court, I can see that we are about out of time on the podcast, but thank you so much for joining me. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm sure that the millions of people listening are going to feel the same.
Yes, yay.
So, Edge of Oblivion is coming out February 3rd for your Amazon Kindle. It's going to feature the fantastic work of our guest this week, Courtney Cantrell, the mercy and the schadenfreude of the Solus. Courtney, thank you again. Elevator People in 2014.
Woo! Thanks for all of your encouragement and support. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.